In a crowded conference hall filled with scholars and dignitaries, Emma quietly took her seat, unnoticed and underestimated. Her simple attire and modest presence drew dismissive glances and whispered jokes. After all, what could a librarian possibly add to this gathering of experts? But as she rose to speak, a subtle yet unmistakable detail caught the audience's eye: her uniform beneath the jacket, a symbol of service and sacrifice. The room fell silent, stunned into respect. What they thought was an ordinary librarian was, in truth, a decorated veteran with a story that demanded to be heard. The setting is a prestigious annual conference held at the historic City Cultural Center, a sprawling building with polished marble floors, high vaulted ceilings, and walls adorned with portraits of notable scholars and cultural icons. This conference was a gathering place for academics, historians, military veterans, and community leaders who came to discuss heritage, knowledge preservation, and the evolving role of libraries in the digital age. The air buzzed with the low murmur of intellectual discourse, punctuated by the clinking of coffee cups and rustling of papers. At the heart of this environment was Emma Carter, a woman in her early 40s with a quiet demeanor but a resolute spirit. Emma worked as the head librarian at the downtown public library, a role she held with pride and passion. Unlike many of her peers who chased prestigious university posts or corporate research roles, Emma's commitment was deeply rooted in community service and accessibility. She believed libraries were more than repositories of books. They were sanctuaries of knowledge and places where every person, regardless of background, could find dignity and empowerment. Emma's appearance at the conference was not out of vanity or ambition, but a sincere invitation to share her experiences developing outreach programs for veterans and underprivileged youth. Her work had transformed the local library into a vibrant hub of support, offering literacy classes, technology access, and quiet spaces for healing. She was invited to speak on a panel about libraries as community pillars in modern society, a topic close to her heart. Yet, despite the honor of being selected, Emma felt a familiar weight of invisibility. The conference, dominated by decorated professors, military historians, and policymakers, was a world where status was often marked by academic degrees, military ranks, or well-known publications. Emma's simple dress and unassuming blouse, practical skirt, and a modest blazer made her blend into the background, and some attendees whispered dismissive remarks about her: just a librarian. Her position, though impactful in the community, was viewed by some as less prestigious, less important. One such skeptic was Dr. Jonathan Hale, a renowned historian with a stern reputation and a sharp tongue. Dr. Hale had built his career on military history and cultural preservation, but he carried an air of elitism that often alienated others. To him, Emma was an anomaly, someone without the academic pedigree or military service that seemed to define the conference's core values. He often challenged her ideas subtly during preparatory meetings, questioning the practical impact of library programs compared to formal military archives or academic research. Alongside Emma stood a handful of allies, people who recognized the quiet strength in her work. Among them was Sarah Martinez, a fellow panelist and sociologist who specialized in social inclusion and the role of community centers in urban regeneration. Sarah appreciated Emma's dedication to marginalized groups and often advocated for more diverse voices at such events. Another was Lieutenant Colonel James Bryant, recently retired from active duty, who had transitioned into a role advising veterans services. James respected Emma's tireless support for veterans struggling with reintegration, PTSD, and social isolation. Although James carried the authority of his military rank and experience, he spoke of Emma with genuine admiration, often highlighting the synergy between military service and community healing that her programs fostered. The stakes were significant. Emma knew that her voice, and those of similar community workers, could influence how policymakers and institutions funded and prioritized library programs nationwide. In a time when digital media threatened to sideline physical libraries and shrinking public budgets put social services at risk, This conference was more than a meeting, it was a battleground for the future of community support. Emma's values, humility, service, resilience drove her forward, even when faced with skepticism. She saw libraries as vital lifelines, especially for those forgotten by the system, veterans without homes, children without resources, elderly citizens craving connection. Her goal was to show that dignity was not defined by rank or wealth, but by the courage to serve and the commitment to uplift others. On the morning of her panel, Emma prepared meticulously in the green room, reviewing notes and rehearsing key points. Outside, the lobby filled with attendees dressed in crisp suits and uniforms, their conversations a mix of technical jargon and polite greetings. Emma felt the familiar tension, the sense of being an outsider looking in, but she focused on her purpose. She was ready to speak not just for herself, but for all those whose stories were rarely told on grand stages. As the panel session was announced, Emma took her seat beside the other speakers. The moderator introduced her with a nod and a brief summary of her achievements, but the words felt perfunctory amidst the more grandiose introductions of decorated officers and acclaimed scholars. Throughout the initial discussion, Emma contributed insights grounded in real-world experience: how libraries had become sanctuaries for healing and education, how practical programs bridged gaps between civilians and veterans, and how quiet dignity in service created. What Emma did not expect, and what many did not know, was the hidden story beneath her calm exterior, a story of service and sacrifice that went far beyond the library walls. Underneath her blazer, concealed from view, was a uniform she had once worn with honor, that of a military intelligence officer who had served in conflict zones and endured the harsh realities of war. Her commitment to community work was a continuation of that service, a path forged through resilience and a desire to heal wounds invisible to many. But for now, at the conference, Emma was just a librarian, a title too small to contain the strength she carried. As the panel discussion progressed, the atmosphere in the room subtly shifted. Emma's practical, heartfelt words about community service and the vital role libraries played in healing and education were met with polite nods, but rarely with the enthusiasm that greeted the more traditional voices on the stage. Many attendees, entrenched in their military and academic prestige, viewed her contributions as secondary, nice, perhaps, but lacking the gravitas of formal research or frontline experience. Dr. Jonathan Hale, the sharp-tongued historian, took particular interest in undermining Emma's perspective. When the moderator opened the floor to questions, Hale's hand shot up with an air of authority. His voice carried easily across the packed hall as he posed a pointed challenge. Ms. Carter, your dedication to community outreach is commendable, but can you explain how programs like yours tangibly affect national defense or historical preservation with limited budgets? Should resources not prioritize documented military archives and tactical training? His tone was less question than indictment, a veiled dismissal of Emma's work as peripheral and unessential. The crowd murmured their agreement, some sharing skeptical glances. For many, the value of a public library's outreach seemed distant from the raw realities of security and history. Emma felt the familiar sting of being seen as just a librarian, a label that ignored the full scope of her identity and contribution. Before she could answer, a young man from the audience, clad in a freshly pressed uniform adorned with ribbons and insignia, leaned forward. Exactly. We need rigor and discipline in how we honor the past and prepare for the future. Soft skills have their place, but they cannot replace hard-earned military experience. His words, though measured, echoed a sentiment that undervalued social service and education. Emma took a breath, steadying herself. Respectfully, she began, her voice clear and calm. The strength of a nation is not only measured by its weapons or archives, but by the resilience of its communities. Libraries are where knowledge becomes accessible to all, where veterans find support, and where the next generation learns the values that underpin our society: fairness, dedication, and mutual respect. Her words resonated with some, but others remained unconvinced. She noticed a few attendees exchanging dismissive smirks or checking their phones, signaling disinterest or impatience. Backstage, Tension simmered as she prepared for the next segment. Emma's thoughts drifted to the quiet work she led daily, assisting veterans with paperwork, hosting literacy workshops for refugee children, and creating safe spaces for those forgotten by the system. Her efforts were unglamorous, far from the spotlight, yet essential. Meanwhile, behind the polished veneer of the conference, the social dynamics were unyielding. Several influential attendees whispered in tight circles about the appropriateness of Emma's presence. Some questioned whether someone without a formal military background or academic doctorate should be given such a platform. The core of the conflict lay not in overt hostility but in the subtle, pervasive assumptions that defined worth and authority. Emma's role as a librarian and community servant clashed with deeply ingrained perceptions of prestige tied to rank, academic achievement, and inherited status. Amidst the crowd, Marcus Sterling sat with an air of condescension, arms crossed. He'd heard Emma's contributions, but dismissed them as sentimental distractions. To Marcus, true honor was worn on uniforms and etched in combat history, not in quiet acts of service or social work. The climax of this tension arrived during a break when the conference hosted a networking session. In a grand hall adorned with banners and photographs celebrating military achievements, Emma mingled cautiously. Greeted with polite but distant nods, a group of high-ranking officers, including General Klaus Weber, approached with measured steps. General Weber was known for his traditional values and fierce loyalty to military hierarchy. His eyes, sharp beneath a heavy brow, fixed on Emma with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "Ms. Carter," he said formally, "I've heard your name. You run the library programs downtown, supporting veterans and youth?" Emma nodded respectfully. "Yes, General. Our aim is to provide resources and support to those who need it most." General Weber's expression tightened. "Important work, no doubt. But tell me, how do you ensure your programs truly benefit those who've served? There's a difference between charity and accountability." Before Emma could respond, Dr. Hale interjected, his voice dripping with condescension. "Accountability requires discipline and measurable outcomes, not feel-good social initiatives. Libraries are for reading, not reshaping societal values." The room grew quiet, tension thickening. Emma's patience was tested, but her response was measured. Her voice unwavering. "Discipline and accountability are essential, sir. But so is compassion. True service honors those values equally by empowering individuals to reclaim their dignity and rebuild their lives. Without that, we risk creating a society that values power over people." Her words found a quiet echo in the room, though the weight of skepticism remained. Later, in a smaller gathering, Emma found solace in a conversation with Lieutenant Colonel James Bryant, who expressed his frustration with the rigidity of the conference culture. "Emma, the system sometimes forgets that strength isn't only in combat or command," James admitted. "It's in resilience, in healing, in quiet courage that doesn't seek recognition." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Victoria Hawthorne, a young pilot with a sharp mind and sharper tongue. Victoria, representing the new guard of elite aviators, was less sympathetic. "Why waste time on social programs when we could focus on innovation and strategy?" she challenged. "The world isn't kind to weakness." Emma looked Victoria in the eye, her tone calm but firm. "Strength and innovation thrive best in communities where everyone is supported, not just the privileged few. Ignoring that is not strength, it's short-sightedness." Victoria smirked, unconvinced, and walked away, leaving Emma to contemplate the battles that went beyond the battlefield, battles of perception, respect, and fairness. As the day wore on, Emma faced whispered doubts and outright challenges, but remained steadfast. The moral dilemma crystallized: how to bridge the gap between tradition and progress, between prestige and humility, and between exclusive power and inclusive service. Emma's internal struggle grew. She wrestled with feelings of isolation and invisibility, but drew strength from the knowledge that her work touched lives in profound ways. Yet the question lingered: would those who held influence truly see her worth, or dismiss it as inconsequential? Toward the evening, the panel reconvened for a final session that promised to set the tone for future policies. Emma prepared to speak last, her moment to make an undeniable impression. But before she could begin, a sudden announcement behind the scenes. Bonds were forged that day between soldiers and civilians, between tradition and progress. The conference would forever be remembered not for its speeches or policies, but for the moment when a librarian's uniform revealed a story of valor that transcended expectations. The applause had barely settled when the conference hall shifted in tone. No longer a place of judgment, but a space for healing and reflection. Emma stood near the podium, her uniform crisp and her posture steady, yet her eyes revealed a vulnerability few had ever seen before. The spotlight was no longer harsh but warm, inviting her to share not just her past, but her journey toward reconciliation and service beyond the battlefield. As she began to speak, her voice was calm, sincere, and filled with the quiet strength that had always defined her. "I never sought recognition for my service," Emma said, "because I believe the true honor lies in what we do after the uniform comes off. Many of us carry scars that no medal can heal, scars of war, of loss, and of being misunderstood." Her gaze swept the room, meeting eyes that now held respect rather than doubt. But it is in the everyday acts, the librarian guiding a veteran through a difficult night, the neighbor listening without judgment, that we find our greatest strength. Her words resonated deeply with the audience. Veterans nodded in agreement. Civilians listened with newfound empathy. The story of Emma Carter was no longer just about a hidden military past. It had become a powerful narrative about community, compassion, and the unrecognized battles fought daily by so many. Behind the scenes, a wave of accountability began to ripple through the conference, organizers and attendees alike. Those who had doubted or dismissed Emma's contributions felt the weight of their prejudices and the cost of underestimating quiet resilience. The program director, who had initially been hesitant about Emma's role, publicly acknowledged her error. "We have learned that service is not confined to rank or appearance," he said. "Emma has taught us that dignity and courage come in many forms, often unseen." Several former skeptics approached Emma privately, offering heartfelt apologies. Among them was Marcus Sterling, whose earlier arrogance had caused so much pain. His voice was low, filled with remorse. "I judged you by what I saw, not who you are," he admitted. "You've shown me the meaning of true strength, and I'm sorry it took me this long to see it." Emma accepted the apology with grace, understanding that redemption is a process, not a moment. The conference organizers moved swiftly to implement change. They introduced new policies to ensure that future events would honor diverse experiences and foster inclusivity. Veteran support programs were expanded, integrating voices like Emma's to bridge the gap between military and civilian life. Training sessions emphasized humility, respect, and the importance of listening, values that had carried Emma through her journey. Outside the hall, the media coverage shifted tone as well. Initial skepticism gave way to admiration, and stories of Emma's leadership spread beyond the conference walls. Social media buzzed with discussions about the hidden heroes among us, the librarians, the caregivers, the quiet warriors whose contributions often go unnoticed. Hashtags like #QuietCourage and #Respect for Service trended, inspiring a broader conversation about dignity and inclusion. Emma herself became an unlikely role model, invited to speak at schools, community centers, and veteran gatherings. She shared not just her military experience, but her vision of service as a lifelong commitment, a call to uphold respect and understanding in every interaction. Her message was simple yet profound. Honor is earned through compassion, and courage is shown through persistence. Yet despite the newfound recognition, Emma remained grounded. She declined offers of fame or high-profile endorsements, choosing instead to return to her work at the library. There, surrounded by books and community, she found peace in the quiet rhythms of everyday life, helping others find their stories, just as she had found hers. One evening, as she closed the library, Emma paused by a display dedicated to veteran stories. Among the photographs and letters was a new edition, a framed picture of herself in uniform, standing beside General Muller, both smiling quietly. Beneath it, a plaque read, "For service beyond the uniform, Emma Carter, a guardian of knowledge and courage." She touched the glass gently, a soft smile playing on her lips. It was not a symbol of pride, but of acceptance, a recognition that her journey, with all its trials and triumphs, was part of a larger story of resilience. In the months and years that followed, Emma's story continued to inspire. Programs modeled on her approach flourished, blending history with hope, trauma with healing. Communities found strength in acknowledging the invisible battles fought within their midst, and respect became not just a word but a lived practice. At home, Emma's family saw a transformation as well. The wounds of the past began to heal, replaced by conversations filled with understanding and gratitude. Her father, once distant, reached out with quiet pride. "You've done more than I ever could," he said softly. "You carry the legacy with grace." Emma's answer was simple, echoing the lessons she had learned. It's not about the legacy we inherit, but the courage we choose every day. Her story, once shadowed by dismissal and doubt, had blossomed into a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of quiet strength and the enduring impact of respect. As the sun set on another day, Emma walked home through the streets of her town. The weight of judgment lifted from her shoulders. She carried with her not medals or titles, but the profound peace of having been truly seen, and the determination to ensure others would be seen too. The journey was far from over, but in that moment, there was justice. Not the kind spoken of in courtrooms or headlines, but the deeper justice of acknowledgement, redemption, and human dignity. And that was a victory worth more than any accolade. As Emma's story shows us, true strength often hides in quiet places beyond medals, uniforms, or loud acclaim. It lives in the dignity we show others, in the respect we choose to give, and in the courage it takes to stand tall when unseen. If Emma's journey touched you, if it reminded you of someone whose quiet resilience has inspired you or challenged you to look deeper, we invite you to honor that spirit today. Please comment below with the word, a powerful reminder of the respect and dignity every person deserves, no matter their story or status. Let's start a conversation about what real courage looks like, and celebrate those who carry it silently, shaping our world with quiet grace. Your word can be a light for those whose bravery often goes unnoticed. Thank you for watching and sharing this message of respect and hope.